Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Danish Foreign Minister. I just sat down in my couch in my home. I met you a couple of hours ago when you gave a press briefing to the media at the Foreign Ministry here in Israel. I was the Danish woman, Jane Keel, also known as Jerusalem Jane around the world, who got to ask you the very last question. I gotta be honest with you, just see you walking into the room actually made me miss Denmark, and it made me emotional. I felt like you brought a little piece of Denmark with you. I have been living in Israel for 10 years, but naturally Denmark still has a big piece of my heart. There was so much more that I wanted to ask you. There were so many things that I wanted to have told you if I had had the opportunity to speak more with you. And that is why I am making this video update. You are in Israel in a critical time, in a very traumatic time, in a time like no other. If you haven't been here through the time we have gone through since October 7, you will never be able to understand the amount of grief, of heartache, of trauma, of death, of pain, of destruction. It is incomprehensible. I tried to speak from my heart just a little bit in the words that I told you today. You just had been visiting Yad Vashem, and I got you a chance to show you the photo of an 83-year-old Holocaust survivor. Her name was Ludmila. She went through the horrors of the Holocaust to come to Israel, to start a family, to live in a nursing home, an old people's home, go outside, wait on a bench for her daughter to take her to the doctor, just for a big Palestinian terrorist to attack her and to stab her over and over again, 5, 6, 7 times, stabbing this tiny little Holocaust survivor who was fighting for her life, being brutally murdered, surviving the Holocaust, to be murdered in a horrific terror attack here in Israel. I shared her photo today. I also told you about Elad Yaakov, a 35-year-old Jewish father who was out driving with his 10-year-old son when Islamic Jihad terrorists opened fire at their vehicle, and they murdered this father with his son in the car. And he called back home to his mom saying, "Father is dead. They killed him. Yes, they killed my father." In the same terror attack, these Palestinian terrorists murdered 2 elderly ladies driving in their vehicles, murdered for no other reason than being Jewish, meaning in a couple of weeks, 3 elderly women, grandmothers, were murdered in terror attacks here in Israel. A father was murdered in front of his 10-year-old son, and a 12-year-old Jewish boy was murdered when a Palestinian terrorist opened fire at a public bus here in Israel. Do the Danish media report about these terror attacks? Because they happen again and again and again and again. And what also happens again and again is that the Palestinian Authority is going to pay all of these terrorists thousands of dollars every month for murdering a Jew. Maybe right now you are out in the beautiful Judean mountains in Ramallah meeting the Palestinian Authority. I wonder, Lars, if you have the courage to ask them, why are you encouraging the murder of the Jewish people? Why are you paying $400 million every year to terrorists who is murdering the Jewish people, including 83-year-old Ludmila, who survived the Holocaust? That is the reality here in Israel. Israel was attacked on 7 fronts. Israel was attacked on 7 fronts. A nation that is smaller, Lars, It is smaller than Denmark. With all of these evil people who want to eradicate the Jewish homeland and the Jewish people. And fathers, husbands, brothers, nephews has to leave their ordinary job as a dentist, as a hairdresser, and they have to go to work. They have to go into the Gaza Strip and fight these Hamas, ISIS terrorists who committed the worst massacre towards the Jewish people since the Holocaust. They mutilated women and men. They mass raped women and men and teenagers. They burned babies alive. They beheaded hundreds of people. They tied women to the trees and they took turn on them and they mutilated their genitals. And now hundreds and thousands of women here in Israel are home alone with their children because their husbands are fighting these monsters in Gaza, who, by the way, still fire rockets into Israel. Hezbollah fired more than 16,000 rockets into Israel in 2024, and more than 100,000 people has been refugees here in Israel because of all of these rockets and missiles firing into Israel. You cannot begin to understand, Mr. Danish Prime Minister. I'm sorry, Foreign Minister. You were the Prime Minister when I lived in Denmark, Lars. Now you are the Foreign Minister. You cannot begin to understand the consequences, the reality, the trauma of the Jewish people. I told you today in that press conference, there is not one family in Israel that's not traumatized, who hasn't loved a loved one on October 7, or knew someone who lost a loved one, or someone who was killed. More than 800 sons of Israel soldiers has been killed defending Israel against the Houthis, against Hezbollah, against Islamic Jihad, against Hamas, against the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, when they are committing outrageous terror attacks here in Israel. Thousands of children, Lars, are growing up in Israel without a dad or without a mom because they were brutally murdered in terror attacks here in Israel, and the Palestinian Authority are paying $400 million a year to these terrorists who is murdering the Jewish people. That's the reality. The trauma in this country, Lars, you cannot comprehend. All of these things I wanted to share with you when I met you today in the Foreign Ministry, but naturally there was not the opportunity to speak so much. I hope, Lars, as I shared what I did, that I just got to touch your heart a little bit, because besides being the Foreign Minister of Denmark, you are also a husband, you are a father, and now you are a grandfather to baby Marius. Congratulations. But unlike the people living here in Israel, you don't have to worry about when you are out with the stroller walking with your grandson, if a terrorist is going to come from behind and stab you in the back, or if they're going to run you over with a truck or with a vehicle, crushing you and your grandson to death. But that's the reality here in Israel. And what do you do? What do Denmark do? What does the rest of the world do? You push, and you're pressuring Israel for a two-state solution, to hand over land to these monsters, to these terrorists who continue to massacre the Jewish people. Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland, especially the northern part of Samaria, is full of terrorists who is armed to the teeth, committing these horrendous terror attacks. Lars, if you should have just a little bit of sense of what it's like to live here in Israel, on this short, brief moment where you are in Israel, you should have gone and met that young woman, the mother who is now sitting with 2 children alone because her husband was just murdered by Palestinian terrorists. Or you should go meet the family of that Holocaust survivor, Ludmila, who was brutally murdered in yet another terror attack, to try and get just a little bit of comprehension of what it's like to live here in Israel, the Jewish people who is home in their God-given homeland. So it was an honor to participate in that press briefing today. Lars, like I started by saying, I am happy to see you. Welcome to Israel for such a time as this. And I told you the stage is yours. What is your word of encouragement? What is your word to the millions of Israelis, the Jewish people who is watching you, being here in Israel now in the most traumatic time since the Holocaust? Lars Løkke Rasmussen, I'm here living in Israel as long as my visa is being renewed. I would love to communicate more with you. I would love to give you more insight about what it's like as a Danish person who has been living here for more than 10 years, just being one small voice, trying to reach the world about what is really happening in Israel, being girly boots on the ground, sharing the news, the truth, and the views about every terror attack. I had a friend who was brutally murdered in a terror attack, stabbed in the back, out shopping food for his family. I would love to communicate more with you, Lars Løkke. I'm here, I'm available. I also want to say hi to Rasmus Tantholdt, a Danish journalist who is doing a good job. It was an honor to just briefly to get to talk to you today in the Foreign Ministry. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, be a light when you and Denmark is joining the Security Council in the United Nations, who has a deep hate against Israel and always condemning Israel. You could be a light standing up for Denmark like the Danes did during the Holocaust. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, it was an honor to meet you today, and in this video just speak to you a little bit from my heart.